So thanks for inviting me.
No problem.
What are we, what did you, what is the format? Is it just a conversation?
Yeah, so it's just a conversation. It's just you and I. We'll talk a little bit about your journey in Agile. We'll talk about maybe an excerpt from a book or two, a little bit of information that you got posted on your website. So it'll just kind of be a free flowing conversation, but all focused kind of around Agile and around your journey in the space and kind of around what it is you do. So
Cool. Sounds like a plan.
no problem. Sometimes we have people who join us. Sometimes we don't. Looks like we've got one guest here. Kiara, if you wanna message our community, kind of run a small community of practice of Scrum Masters, and we just, like to network and work with one another. So if you want to send a message to the group and let them know that, we're getting started, Bob is here, then they can join us and take part in this conversation. Sometimes if they ask questions from the chat, I'll bring them in.
That's, that sounds wonderful.
Wonderful. I think we can go ahead and get started. I don't want to wait too long. So I'll start things off with the same question that I ask. So I want to start with kind of the same question I start with most of my guests that I have on the show, and that is, when did you fall in love with Agile?
Oh, gosh. Well, in the late 90s, I was a software engineer as my background,
Mm-hmm.
software engineering, computer science. And I started writing code, and then I started growing, getting promoted. And then I became a manager.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Probably my first management role was in maybe the 87, so late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I started growing as a leader. It turned out that I was fairly effective. A lot of developers aren't effective as leaders.
Sure.
It turned out that I was lucky for whatever reason, and I was pretty effective leader. And I started playing with, kept my eyes on new developments in software process. And when Agile emerged, I was a very early adopter of that. So, for example, Scrum, the original Scrum white paper was written in 93, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it about 95 and started applying it in 97.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was before there was any Scrum guide or
Right.
anything like that. I don't even think there was a Scrum book at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a lot of, it had some novel ideas like the notion of a stand up or the
Mm-hmm.
notion of iterative development. And it was just interesting. So I was leading teams,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave me an opportunity to experiment with it. And I saw good results.
Wonderful.
And the rest is history, I guess.
Or the rest is the future, right?
Or the
Um,
rest is the future.
so you've been in Agile in this space for 30 years from the Agile perspective, and even before that as a developer. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in this industry across your decades of time in this space?
It's sort of, I think about it, I do a podcast with a friend of mine, and we sometimes we look back and we complain about, how things have gone, and we wish for a future that might look like this.
Right, right.
And I think Agile has gotten very commercialized,
Mm-hmm.
um, very frameworkized, and um, and almost lost. Many people have lost the simplicity of the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, I'm not trying to sound like a dinosaur, but if you were around at the beginning of Agile, there was something wonderful about the simplicity of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the key customer of Agile was the developer and the customer.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about product managers or project managers, or managers. It was about developers rock, and let's make them happy and connect them to the client customers
Mm-hmm.
in doing work. There was something really simple about that. Extreme programming was one of the models, the methods at that time. And now we've lost that simplicity. Now there are people who are trying to remind us to get back to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? To get back to another way of saying get back to the basics or get back to the essence of the principles. But I think we've evolved quite a bit. So I've seen that evolution, and I'd like to see it devolve a little bit back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite story is I once attended an Agile conference, and there was in the Midwest. I think it was in Ohio, or Chicago, it doesn't matter. But there was about 800 people, 800 people to 1,000 people in the audience.
Okay.
And Michael Feathers is a refactoring guy. So he's an extreme programming guy. He's authored things. He was relatively famous. I haven't heard from him in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a keynote, and he put some source code up on the screen, and he asked the audience like how many people were comfortable, like how many people understood it.
Mm-hmm.
And less than like 50 people raised their hand, and how many people are comfortable with code, and less than 50 people raised. So out of 1,000 people in the audience, and it was an Agile conference,
Mm-hmm.
only less than 50 people were actually developers, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Everyone else was release train engineers, scrum masters, right? Everyone else talked about software development, but they weren't
Doing it.
doing. That's when it hit me that we've evolved. We've sort of evolved in Agile, I think, too far away from the basics.
Sure. And so you being an engineer, I'm sure that you probably understand this, that a lot of developers or engineers don't necessarily have that like people facing personality, I'll say, right? And so sometimes they prefer to stay in their cubicles, behind their screens, sometimes locked away in a dark room. And so, how can we, is it possible to get more developers more comfortable with um, kind of going out and being a little bit more personable and learning more about the framework and getting more comfortable interacting with the customers? Because I think that what we've seen is the scrum masters and the product owners and the RTEs have the experience being that servant leader, if you will, or being that guide to this process or acting as an intermediary. And so the developers haven't had to. So is there a way that we can change that dynamic up, and what can we, our developers or our engineers, do to get closer to what this thing was kind of really meant to be from its infancy?
I think stop doing the buffering is a
Mm,
simple, like just stop that.
mm-hmm,
so so I agree with you that software developers are traditionally introverts,
mm-hmm.
and they may not deal well with people, but they are actually out in society, like they have families and they have children,
No, they.
and they do go to the grocery store, and they manage to communicate to buy things.
Wow.
So exactly, I know it blows your mind. So uh, it used to be a joke. So at Microsoft, in the early days of Microsoft, there used to be the joke that every developer had their own office, and they closed the door, and you slid pizzas under their door, and they slid code out of the door, and no one knew what they looked like,
Sure,
right? Their hair,
recluses, right?
they were reclusive, their hair grew, right? They were like, they would count, and they would be like 8 years older and long hair. and and there was a few developers like that, but it became a stereotype.
Right.
So my real answer is developers can interact if we
Hmm.
give them the opportunity,
Sure.
right? If we just, it may sound odd, but we're all part of the team.
Right. Absolutely.
Let's get together to solve customer. What are our goals? Doing better work, to
Yep.
deliver value to customers, to make money, to get happiness, whatever that is.
Hmm.
The more we're inclusive, the less we, sort of stereotype people and put them in boxes, and the more we are inclusive, I think the better off the results are. And we have to meet people where they are. Like some developers will be shy,
Right.
so we help them interact. I was a CTO of a company. I had about 120 developers and testers that reported to me.
Hmm.
We had agile teams, and while they had certainly different personality types, all of our developers interacted with customers and with our C-level team.
Hmm.
Period. And it worked beautifully over time. And if someone was a little shy, we didn't force them. We
Right.
gave them an opportunity. We gave them opportunities to shine. So I actually think that it's perfectly possible. We've sort of got these intermediaries for convenience, right?
Right.
Another reason is not just shyness. there is this view that we want to keep them writing code.
Right.
It's less efficient if they meet customers.
Right.
And I would argue it's actually the goal is not lines of code efficiency. The goal is delighting the client. And the more that the producers understand the consumers, the closer they are, the better the results are going to be.
I agree. I worked for an insurance company previously, and there was almost this vitriol when the business would even hear about developers potentially talking to end clients or the customers. It was almost like all hell was breaking loose if a developer even dared send an email to one of the stakeholders. And so I just never understood why or where that kind of fear or resistance came from the business.
I think it's just a lot of stereotyping and a lot of having this myopic view that someone has one job and we need to keep them busy.
Sure.
It would be the same thing about project managers not writing code
Hmm.
or testers not don't write code. I mean, we try to get testers to work with developers as well.
Yeah.
And I want testers to write test cases, and I'd like developers, right, or have testers write code if they can, and it's okay for developers to write test cases if they can, right? There shouldn't be these artificial boundaries, but I think it comes from the organizational silos and the structures
Yeah.
is one of the original, sort of the structural side of things. But I'm with you. You get better results. At that same company I was talking about when I was in that role, we would have every member of our, including our leaders, every month would sit down with our customer support folks on their phone line, on their headsets,
Hmm.
and we would for 4 hours every month, and we would listen to how customer support was interacting with real customers
Hmm.
in supporting our software.
Hmm.
And my boss, I remember my boss made me do it, and he was like, I want us to do that. I was fighting it back. I
Yeah.
was arguing with Ralph about it. And I finally succumbed. I'm like, we could try it, but we have better things to do than that.
Right.
And so even I am wrong most of the time. And then we tried it, and what happened is it's not just developers. Everyone started getting a feeling of one humility because we were producing some crap and we needed to get better.
Right.
Uh, uh, Two, quality went through the roof because there was this accountability. Three, we were closer to we were we were really close to our customers.
Hmm.
Four, we respected customer support folks because they had a really
Tough
tough
job.
job.
Yeah.
So it just changed. It really changed our lens where we went from this to this,
Hmm.
and it was
Blinders
a
came
really
off.
good call.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something that you said, and I'll go ahead and reference one of the books that you're a contributor
Okay.
of. So for anyone who's watching, 97 Things Every Scrum Practitioner Should Know, Collective Wisdom from the Experts. And so in your section or your chapter, it's called Servant Leadership Starts from Within. And so one of the things you said that kind of ties into kind of acting as that buffer, right, is ways Scrum Masters serve themselves, right? A lot of times we get so focused on serving the team, serving the product owner, serving the developers. How can we serve ourselves? And one paragraph that stood out to me was Scrum Masters serve themselves by fostering disengagement from their roles. They give themselves the ability to ignore a situation, to see what happens, to not take immediate action on a problem, to see if someone else might pick it up, to see what might emerge, to not always feel responsible for serving and acting, but instead for creating the opportunity for others to be Scrum Masters, to be masters of Scrum too. That was really powerful for me personally, but I think that that may go against some of the popular beliefs, kind of what the business is expecting the role of a Scrum Master to be. Can you talk a little bit about the mindset you were in when you wrote that and how important you believe it is for Scrum Masters to, at some point, take the reins off and allow teams to start becoming self organizing?
Sure. And it's a good quote. It sounded good, so I don't even remember writing it. So so thank you. I mean, I remember the concept.
Sure.
Uh, I actually don't. Victor, I'd like to make it even more general and say it's not just Scrum Masters.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say any servant leader.
Mm.
So to me, a product owner has a servant leader aspect. Scrum Master has a servant leader aspect, and managers, directors have a servant leader aspect. I think part of our role as leaders is to create space for team growth. Is part of it, I think, so being in there to support the team is one thing. Uh, but one of the drivers for me is I would always experiment. I'm a little crazy. So when I was a coach, scrum master, leader, like there were times where I would call in sick to my team and miss a stand up, and I was faking illness. I'm just a weird guy. So I'm like calling, back when we used telephone, I'm like
Right.
calling, someone on the team, and I'm like, oh God, I'm really in the weather. Oh, you're gonna have to cover the stand up for me, and backlog refinement. I can't make it. And I'm sitting at home. I mean, I'm not lazy,
Sure.
so I'm reading a book or whatever, and see. I wanted to give the team space and see what happens.
Right.
Uh, and sometimes teams would cancel the stand up. It's like we're not going to have it if Bob's not here,
Right.
and that gave me data. I was like, oh,
They don't
maybe
see the
they still
value,
need me.
right?
It's value, right? So what's going on with that? There were other teams that they just ran through that, and they had the stand up, and it was beautiful. I didn't even need. Sometimes I would step away for 2 or 3 days. We were doing strategic planning or something,
Mm-hmm.
and what I found is part of leadership is giving the team space to grow.
Mm.
I think that's true for all leaders. I think the more we're trying to help, sometimes that can neutralize. You have to give opportunities for learning and growth.
Right.
Now, it's up to every individual scrum master as to when to do that. I don't
Right.
think you do it. So I'm not suggesting that everyone who's listening take a 1 year sabbatical under the banner of I'm giving my team space, right? So it's situational,
Right.
and it's related to the maturity of the team,
Mm-hmm.
and it's related to the maturity of the scrum master as well, like their maturity as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm serious about it. The other part of that is, what do you do there? You give yourself a break, like take off. Sometimes servant leadership can be a bit of a burden, like to be always on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always on as the scrum master. I always have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
That can be exhausting. So part of it is you're doing your job to grow the team, and then part of it is self-care, that
Right.
you're giving yourself a little buffer to recharge your own batteries.
Yeah, and that really goes back kind of the heart of Agile, right? To allow people that kind of work-life balance and not just expect you to be a code bot that's coding for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Exactly. Now, part of your question was, how do you handle that in the real world? Well, what I just said, in some cultures, that actually would be respected and supported. Some company cultures,
We're absolutely.
and in
Yep.
and in other company cultures, you're going to be looked like you're crazy, or you're
Right.
not doing your job.
Right.
So that's part of the situational nature. You know, I think the prime directive in being a good scrum master or a good leader or a good whatever is survival. So don't disrupt things too much. So you have to. So it's not just situational to the team;
Right.
it's situational to your organizational culture as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one thing a lot of Scrum Masters have to recognize is that although we're here in the role of a Scrum Master, in the role of a servant leader, in the role of a change agent, sometimes the way in which we prescribe change or the dosage that we prescribe it needs to be lowered based on the patient that we're serving for that time.
Absolutely. And the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm unapologetic. We've talked in my Metacast a few times about it. Part of the balance is survival. And I'm not saying that artificially.
Right.
Everyone, it's a career. People
Absolutely.
need to be paid. So You want to manage risk on that side as well, and really sense and respond to the team, to yourself, and to
Mm-hmm.
the organization. But
Absolutely.
what I just said, I think, is a core principle. In order for anyone to grow a team, if you look at sports teams, I know it's a bad metaphor sometimes, but good coaches are not micromanaging the teams.
Correct.
They're not they give instruction, and depending on the maturity level of the team, they're giving the team space. The other cool thing is the teams become self-coaching, if that makes sense, right? You see
Absolutely.
leadership rise within the team, and then the coaches are even stepping further back. So I think that metaphor grows that's our if our job is to grow the team,
Mm-hmm.
if that ultimately our job is to grow and mature our team, to put ourselves out of a job, right, metaphorically
Right.
speaking,
Right.
right, then you have to give the team space to grow.
Right. Um, I always like to use sports analogies too for Scrum as well, right? And so I always say, like, Phil Jackson, there's not much he could micromanage Michael Jordan about, right? There's not much, right? You got arguably one of the best players to ever play the game, but you're still his coach. So how do you coach someone that has all of the skills? Well, when you're able to step away from the game far enough to see it in its totality, there are little things that you'll be able to pick out, right? And nuggets you'll be able to give. And because that player is the greatest or a great player, and we're assuming that organizations have hired the best people to do the work that they want them to do to code in the language that they want them to code or develop based on the small input a scrum master can give, provided we've stepped back far enough to see the full landscape. They should be able to take that and run with it and do better with it than we could have even imagined, right? We're just there to sow a seed, hopefully.
Exactly. And again, that's with now think about this real quickly, this nail Phil Jackson and the Bulls.
Hmm.
That was with Michael Jordan.
Right.
And then there were other players. There
Absolutely.
was Scottie Pippen.
Hmm.
There was a
Dennis
center. I
Rodman.
forget it. They had a bunch of centers that were
Hmm.
mediocre. I mean, anyone who makes it into the NBA is a good player, right?
Right.
So, but relative speaking, so it's situational. So there's that metaphor. There's that shuhari metaphor that
Hmm.
talks about the maturity. You can look at it as a team, but you also want to apply it to your coaching of individuals. So
Right.
you can have a relatively mature team, but on the team you have maybe one or two shoe individuals, a couple of high individuals, a Michael Jordan.
Hmm.
So you don't want to coach everyone like you're
That's it.
coaching Michael, and you
Right.
don't want to coach Michael like you're coaching a junior or an entry level player.
Right.
You want to be unique. You want to meet everyone where they are. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good metaphor. I can always appreciate a good metaphor. So tell me about your coaching style. If I were to ask you what type of coaching style do you or stance do you take when you go into an organization? And I know we just kind of talked about, different people being at different places, but what would you say are the first few things that your radars are up for when you're going into an organization to coach, whether it's a Scrum Master or whether it's a development team or a leadership team?
So the first thing before we talk about stances,
Hmm.
and this is something I've learned maybe in the last, experience is a good thing,
Hmm.
but it's also a bad thing, because the more experience we have, the more baggage we have,
Right. More
then the
biases we
more
bring.
assumption and the more assumptions we bring. Like if you see, like as a scrum master, if I see, oh, they're only estimating stories one time in points, and they're never changing their points. They're never re-estimating.
Hmm.
I might have seen that 10 times before in context and it was bad. So then if I judge that to be bad in this context, I could be right,
Hmm.
but I'm frozen. But I could be wrong. So I think what I've learned is I have to drop my baggage at the door
Hmm.
almost daily and go in and just sort of meet the organization with fresh eyes and fresh
Hmm.
ears, and seek to understand rather than seek to judge. So that's one thing. And I see a lot of coaches, particularly very experienced coaches, they'll walk in and it's like, oh, I know what's wrong there. Oh, they should do this. Oh, they
Start
should do
firing off
this.
suggestions, right?
Right. Sometimes they actually write a report. I could come into your chop Victor, and in one day I look around and I have a 20, Victor's doing 20 things wrong, right? And I submit a report, and it's
Right.
based on all this baggage. And some
Right.
of it may be okay, but I don't have enough context, right?
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
rude, it's obnoxious, and
Right.
it's biased, etc. So now it's my heart's in the right place, but it's like shut up and observe. I think
Right. Right.
drop your baggage, shut up, observe, and consider the context for a while. So
Sure.
I think that's good entry advice for any coach.
No, I definitely
Uh,
agree too. One of the things I talk to a lot of Scrum Masters that I work with is I say you don't want to go into the team too early giving those suggestions because the developers are going to look at you like, this guy doesn't even know where the bathroom is at. How is he telling me?
exactly,
I've been working here for 7 years. Like, what are you going to tell me?
exactly. Even if you're right,
Even if you're
even if
right,
you're even if you're right, it's the wrong
especially when
approach.
you're right, actually,
Ex-
especially when you're right.
exactly. So that's one thing. The second is sort of a pet peeve of mine. It's gonna get close to answering your question.
Hmm.
But the other thing I observe with a lot of coaches, and I'm changing myself, is a lot of people have one stance. A very prevalent stance right now in agile coaching is the professional coaching stance.
Hmm.
The professional coaching stance is one where you hold the client as having all information they need, whoever you're coaching,
Hmm.
and you ask powerful questions,
Hmm.
and you don't provide any advice. So rarely do you, right? You're not teaching, you're not mentoring, you're not advising, you're coaching.
Right.
And you're doing that 100% of the time because that's your dominant stance.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's the appropriate stance. Sometimes that's actually not the right stance. But the coach is like, well, this is my only stance. I'm not going to switch
I
stances.
got one move.
And
This is it.
I've got one move, and damn it, you're gonna get that move. And so I actually, when I coach, I'm actually trying to hone my ability to switch stances. And I
Hmm.
think that takes skill and training and practice. And so that I'm not a one trick pony
Hmm.
coach. I have the ability to sense and respond. Now, I think the best stance to enter any coaching conversation is professional coaching, meaning show curiosity, ask a question or two, and then listen,
Hmm.
active listening.
Hmm.
That's a really good entry stance. But then once you get a sense for where things are going, you need to be able to switch.
Right.
It, and a lot of folks don't do that. So
A
I,
lot.
I don't think there's one stance. I think professional coaching is a good anchor,
Hmm.
but I see so many coaches that they can't switch out of it, particularly when you're coaching leaders.
Yeah.
So I find it to be a particularly dangerous stance if you're coaching up, because those folks don't want to get death by a thousand questions. They
Right.
they actually want you to give them some advice or mentor them or something else.
Yeah. A lot of times those are the people who like take action, right? And so
Yeah,
like they're almost to the point of like, give me the action, right? I if you're here, I probably respect your advice. So give me the advice so that I can put it into action, right? Um,
exactly.
and I've worked with some coaches that, I think there are only so many powerful questions that you can ask before someone is like, I mean, someone has taken that stance with me, and it's like, you're here because you're thought to be whether an expert or even if not an expert, someone with a differing level of
Yeah,
experience. And so bring that
yeah,
experience. Let's talk about the experience and what you've seen and potential best practices. And
exactly.
although that may not be exactly what I need here, at least it will give me some insight and a different perspective that I can think about.
That's exactly the point.
Hmm.
And that frustration, and it's funny, it's not so funny, but if you have that conversation with the coach, then they'll ask a question like they won't switch. It's like, well, why do you feel that way? it's,
And it's
it's
just
like
going
it's,
deeper down the rabbit hole.
it's going deeper down the rabbit hole. It's like don't. And again, I'm not professional coaching. Those questions are right. That's a
Sure.
good entry strategy. But like just then, if I sense that you're looking for some options, I need to have the skill to provide to you some options that I've seen work in this
Right.
situation,
Right.
right? And then I can come back and we can explore some questions. How did that land,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which one are you thinking of using? Do you have any questions about that?
Right. Those are the more powerful questions.
Yeah,
So I was perusing your website, right? And you've got a lot of really good information on your website. If anyone wants to check out Bob's website, agile-moose.com, or you can go to his other website. Is it bobgalen.com?
it's just rgalen.com.
R. Galen, which Bob is short for Robert, rgalen.com. And so your Agile Moose site, one of the first things that kind of stood out to me was you've got a page dedicated to Black Lives Matter. And so I think I don't want to date this broadcast in case someone's listening to it 100 years from now when all that's wrong in the world has been righted and racism no longer exists. But talk to me a little bit about your journey, kind of coming to terms with the privilege that you have and what it was that kind of made you, even after you recognized your privilege, made you say, I want to do something to shift the paradigm.
Sure. So I think the genesis story for me is an experience I had with my daughter, and then just the social implications. And my
Sure.
daughter said the daughter was before, probably earlier. I teach a certified agile leadership class. I do mostly coaching. I'm not a trainer who trains a lot, but
Sure.
I do a leadership workshop with the Scrum Alliance. And I was an early adopter. So 2017 I started. And
Hmm.
I like to do pair teaching. So I invite people that I know to pair, who are leaders, to pair teach with me. And my daughter is a social worker,
Hmm.
or was a social worker. She's been in social work. She has a master's degree in social work. She does child social work. She was inner cities, Baltimore, New York. And I invite her. She grew into a leader in the organization, like organizational development and training and social work. But she
Hmm.
doesn't know IT or Agile or anything, but she's a good leader. So we were co-teaching these classes, and I was complaining about a class. I remember here in North Carolina, we had a public class, and it was the first day, and we were setting up the class, and I was whining about not having a diverse enough constituency
Mm.
in the class,
Hmm.
and a little bit of whining. I'm a whiner, so I was moderately whining.
Okay.
And she's like, "Well, what did you do about it?" And I'm like, "I sent an email out." And she's like, "What else did you do?" I'm like, "Well, I sent it." I'm like, "I sent another email out."
I CC two
And
more
she's like,
people.
"Exactly." And and she's like, "Well, that's not good enough." And it's really funny because then father and the daughter are fighting before people, and then people are starting to come into the class. So I'm like, well, what did you want me to do? She's like, you have to work
Mm.
harder to get folks' attention. You may actually, if you want people of color, you may actually have to reach out to them. You may have to go to different groups. You may
Mm.
have to offer a discount. You may have to do it at different hours.
Mm.
you you may have to extend extra effort. If you want more women, you may have to do more of this stuff,
Sure.
right? You got what you got. And I was arguing with her. I'm like, I've done everything I can. I don't, what am I supposed to do? And I thought about it, and I was like, I told her later. I didn't tell her right away, but I'm like, she's right.
Mm.
I'm like, if I want to, I have to take extended action. It's not just good enough to post a Black Lives Matter thing and just say, I support Black Lives Matter, and
Right.
then sit on my butt
Right.
and do nothing about it. There's an action part, there's an advocacy part, there's a partnership part.
Hmm.
And she really inspired me. And so I'm just trying to figure out, I'm trying to better understand my privilege. I'm trying to, I realize that I have a platform, and anything I can do to help the diversity and inclusion space.
Hmm.
Uh, I want to help with that. So I've reached out. There's a young lady in Texas, Anu Gopal, who I
I know I
partnered
knew
with,
very well.
and she attended one of my Cal classes, and then I do discounted for folks in Nigeria, and she sends folks to my classes, and it's a wonderful partnership. And she has a group that sponsors girls in Nigeria in Lagos,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I give money to that because I believe in what's going on there. So I don't talk about everything, but I want to make a difference if I can. We have a diversity section in our podcast that we talk about. Josh and I talk about what are we
Mm-hmm.
doing. So
Right.
moving from supporting it to doing something,
Actively
and
engaged.
doing whatever we can. And we do have a platform. So that post on my website is indicative of that, and just trying to do what I can.
I love it. I love it. I have a community of about 70 Black Scrum Masters and Agilists that I kind of coach and mentor and help guide. And so this is definitely gonna touch them in a very special way. And so if you're having any events in the future, or if there's any way that we could work together, I'd love.
Stay stay in touch with me.
Absolutely.
And you know what, it's what I don't even understand how challenging it is. So I know what I don't know, Victor.
Sure.
I don't know what it's like to be a Black Scrum Master in technology.
Sure.
I don't know what the challenges are, but I know the challenges, right? And
Absolutely.
I don't know. So whatever I can do. Although, the other thing I'm doing, I'm excited. The Agile Alliance has something called Agile in Color,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm mentoring people with that. I have
Okay.
two mentees that I'm working with now. So if anyone in your network would like a mentor, have them reach out. I don't have infinite bandwidth, but if
Right.
anyone's really looking for mentoring around agile coaching
Mm-hmm.
or whatnot, I would love to try to help them grow in their career.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. I'll definitely put the word out. You'll probably be getting some Facebook, some LinkedIn requests, some people following the podcast. Now, give me the name of the podcast. A few people asked about it
Oh, meta hyphen cast. I
in the
can put it
chat.
in the chat.
Sure, Meta hyphen cast. And how often do you guys drop your episodes?
We try to do it probably once every 2 weeks,
Okay.
and we've been doing it since 2010. We have about 220 episodes right now,
Oh wow.
and we're sort of it depends. Right now, Josh is having some personal issues, so
Mm-hmm.
we've slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes life gets in the way
Life
of your
happens.
schedule. So it's about every 2 weeks or so.
Okay. Good stuff. Good. Definitely have to start looking and listening to that. So let me ask you a little bit more about the Black Lives Matter piece. So throughout the pandemic, we've kind of had a little bit more time to kind of watch the news and see about some of the s- racial injustices that have been going on. Do you remember a specific case or situation that you saw in the news, or were made aware of that kind of played a part in shifting your mind and bringing light to the situation?
I think the thing for me for the website, and you can see that I think there's a picture, is George Floyd
Hmm.
was a very so it was the conversations with my daughter.
Hmm.
It was, which happened maybe a year before that. It was my realization that I have, not that I just have privilege, but I have a platform,
Hmm.
right? I'm well known. I'm relatively well known in the Agile community. I have a podcast. I write a lot.
Hmm.
So I have privilege, and part of that privilege is my platform. And what can I do with it?
Hmm.
Uh, and I think George Floyd was a crystallization point for me, as it was, I think, for a lot of people.
Sure.
The other thing is I didn't want to lose. Do you know how like things are newsworthy and then it seems to lose its newsworthiness,
Right. Right.
uh, right? And so for me, and Josh and I talk about this in the Metacast. The reason we have a diversity and inclusion minute is it's an accountability check for us. Every podcast, we try to talk about what have we done since the last podcast.
Mm.
The reason we do that is to not lose energy, to keep ourselves acting and not lose our momentum. And we're not perfect with it, but we want to keep the energy going. So
Right.
that was the point for me.
Good. Good. Thanks for that, Bob. Want to shift a little bit back to some of the books that you've written. So, Scrum Product Ownership, Agile Quality and Testing, Agile Reflections. do you have a favorite, and then software end games, do you have a favorite of the books that you've written?
I think the product ownership book is in its third edition.
I've
So
seen that.
I've got a lot of passion in that space.
Hmm.
The reason I wrote the book in the first place is historically the first edition came out in 2009. I probably started writing it around 2007.
Hmm.
And if you were practicing in Scrum around that time frame, there was guidance around Scrum Masters, but there was very little guidance as to what product ownership looked like.
Hmm.
And so, not just in my company, but like every product owner I met, didn't there wasn't a lot of guidance as to what the hell do I do as a
Right.
product owner.
Right.
And so that's what energizes me is I don't just write. Writing is painful for me, so I don't just write to write. I write to right a wrong. Basically,
Right. Right.
I want to fill the space and try to help people. So
Sure.
that was the genesis of it, and I think over the years, product ownership is still one of the
Behind,
more
right?
challenging spaces in Agile to get the balance right. So that's probably my favorite book.
Okay, sure. Good. That kind of leads us into the next question that I had for you. So, kind of in working in this space, most Scrum Masters are usually certified with at least one of the plethora of certifications out there. But by and large, a majority of the product owners that I've worked with personally have not been certified and haven't even gone to beyond certification, haven't even gone to any formal training for product ownership. And so generally they are either a project manager or some other role within the organization that kind of just gets mapped to product ownership. And so they don't have a true value understanding or even a knowledge of the framework and some of the values and the principles of Agile. So has that also been your experience? And if so, you've obviously written a book about it, but how can we help kind of move the ball on this one?
I mean, I think you're right. It, I think it's because there's such, and it's a little bit happening in Scrum Master too. I think
Yep, I've
people,
seen it.
but not, it's people, people, companies,
Hmm.
organizations, leaders. I don't think they really understand the roles still to this day.
Hmm.
So when a company is going from whatever to Agile, they'll throw project managers at Scrum. I can make anyone a Scrum Master. I can make a project manager a Scrum Master. I can
Right.
make I can grab a Boy Scout and they'll become a Scrum Master. Just do, and it's the same thing with product owners. It's a product manager becomes a product owner, or a BA becomes a product owner. It's
Absolutely.
even worse in product ownership. I was coaching an organization in Europe this morning, and they're struggling with proxy product owners.
Oh my
So
gosh.
there's not these poor guys that it's like they don't have one, they have
They're
one who
rotating
then has,
carousel.
and then they have a proxy who has a proxy. So it's
Right.
like it's so there's no ownership.
Right.
And but the companies are creating that for a variety of reasons. I think there's sort of confusion around the role, not valuing the role, so they try to short shrift it.
Hmm.
I think it happens more in product ownership, which is like on the certification side. I want to get something with you though. I've never been stuck on certification. I remember at one company I was working as a leader,
Hmm.
and I wasn't stuck on hiring people. And this may sound odd because I'm certified and I have done certification. I think experience trumps certs.
Sure.
So I'm not anti-cert. I'm
Hmm.
pro experience, pro
Sure.
chops. And and then what I would do if I hired someone who didn't have a cert, I would want them to just act, or we would grow internal Scrum Masters. So the way we would do that is we would take a developer and they would be a part-time Scrum Master and they would have a mentor. And after
Hmm.
6 months, we would ask them, do you want to be a full-time Scrum Master or do you want to go back and be a developer? We didn't like part-time.
Right.
And so we wanted to commit to the role. And then if they would commit to the role, we would grow them into a team.
Sure.
And I would try, and sometimes they would be, oh, I need to get a cert. I'm like, why don't you just experience for a little while?
Right.
Just
Right.
get some experience. And then after 6 months or so, or 9 months or so,
Let's
if they
revisit it.
really understood and they're like, I would like to get a cert, I'm like, is it important to you? Yeah, I think it would round me out. Then it's a no-brainer. Get them a cert. So to me, the certs are sort of not a validation, but an augmentation, a confidence builder
Yeah.
around it. I want to value the experience over the cert.
Yeah.
That's why I like communities of practice and guilds so much.
Hmm.
Like I would I would take totally uncertified scrum masters or product owners if there was a guild
Yep.
where they were continuously growing. That
Yep.
would be a wonderful thing.
Yep.
Now, yes, offer certifications, but it. I want your reaction. Do you like that
No,
idea? Does
I,
it?
I I agree with you 100%. I think I've seen a lot of people go and get certified because let's be honest, most of these certifications aren't extremely difficult to get
Yep.
anyway, right?
Yep.
Um, but when it comes time to the practical application or the actual understanding of a concept, a lot of people don't have it. And so, yes, through these guilds, through these communities of practice, I run a couple for people who are looking to transition into Agile, and I kind of say the same thing, like have a fundamental understanding of what Scrum is and how to actually do it, and then having the certification will just kind of add some additional credence to it, right? But yeah, by and large, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you. I don't disagree. Yeah.
And it's even the curiosity, Victor. I try to encourage people. Like I think it's a really go to the cert and then think that that's all I have to
Yep.
learn. And
Yep.
it's like no, it's do things like this.
Yeah.
Listen to this podcast. Go to webinars. I mean, grow yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, it's 16 hours, right? If we're talking about the CSM, right? 16 hours. The amount you're gonna forget more things than you learn in that 16-hour class, right? And so until
Exactly.
you're able to actually like do it and put it into practice, do you then commit it to memory and then are you able to go and actually execute on it in the real world? But I mean, the certification is a certification. It's about what are you going to do with it? How are you going to implement it? Even if you're just implementing it at home, in the family, in your current
Exactly.
role, even if you're not doing Scrum, but like implement something and bring that knowledge to the workplace after the fact. It
But
doesn't
but
have to
back
be through the certification.
but back to your question, I think both. The way I'd like to answer it is I think we need to take seriously, like I want to call it Scrum mastery
Hmm.
and product ownership as crafts and professions. And, and and I don't know if we take them, not you and I, but I don't know if in the world we take them seriously enough. It would be like having a master carpenter.
Hmm.
I mean, you professionally are. It may take you 10 or 15 years to become a master craftsperson
Right.
in woodworking. So it's not a one-time thing,
Right.
and you're constantly being mentored and trying to learn and figure out new tools and things. That's the mindset that I want. I think the organizations have to take those roles seriously to inspire those roles as well. I think scrum masters are getting more credibility or more impact than product owners are. Or from a business point of view, I think both of them are devalued or misunderstood.
Hmm.
Product owners are sort of overloaded, um,
Absolutely.
and, and they struggle. They struggle. I mean, literally, the client I was with this morning, to their credit, the director of the product owners, he's trying to level set across like 15 product owners, and he's doing what he found is he has expertise, but the team was tuning him out. So
Mm,
he's trying to bring in an outside person to raise the bar with the team of what it's not the basics. They understand the basics.
right.
It's the sort of the craft of it that they're struggling with.
Yeah, the prophet is not respected in their hometown, so
It's
sometimes you got to
it's
bring
really
an
fun.
outsider.
It's it happens to everyone.
Yeah.
I was at a company for 3 years, and it was and I know my stuff. I'm not perfect, and I realized after about a year that people started tuning me out, and then I had to start bringing in outsiders because it's like I'm the same Bob Galen, yeah, but we've heard you tell that story 100 times. It's like you're a grandfather.
Right,
We
right.
right? So I think there's a natural phenomenon that people tune out the inside, and you have to get outside influence sometimes.
I agree. I agree. So what's next for you, Bob? Right? We're agilists. We're constantly working on continuous improvement. What areas do you want to improve on personally?
I think for me, it relates to what I'm teaching and what I'm working on. Uh, I'm working on a new book, a coaching book, and I teach this leadership workshop. So I'm sort of pivoting away from product
Mm-hmm.
and basic agile, and the two areas that I get passionate about nowadays. And again, I think it's related to it. We're not doing very well. Is one is agile leaders.
Mm-hmm.
We could argue that there's still a challenge with leaders understanding what agile leadership looks like,
Mm,
and then coaches. And we touched on it earlier. The field of agile coaching is I think it's still misunderstood. So that's the two areas for me that I'm developing. One, writing a book, developing classes and things like that, but it's also forcing me to continuously learn in those areas. So
sure.
I've sent myself to coaching classes. I was looking last week at another another coaching class. And the only thing that stopped me, Victor, was the price. I'm like, it was 6 grand or 7 grand. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to pay 6 grand or 7 grand, but I will. I'll eventually work myself up to pay it.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's continuing to develop me in those areas. I took an ORSC, took an ORSC training, organizational relationship systems coaching. It's a professional coaching program, and
Okay.
I years ago I went through that, the training and the cohort
Mm-hmm.
for that coaching style,
Mm-hmm.
and it not only made me a better professional coach, and that was one of my weaker areas, one of my weakest stances.
Mm-hmm.
I'm strong in it, but it was weak relative to my other stances. Wanted to firm it up, and it really changed my coaching style. It changed my life a
Hmm.
lot. It changed me personally a little bit. So I continue to try to challenge myself maybe in those areas for personal learning, but also sharing.
What was the name of that certification? ORSC?
ORSC, it's organizational relationship systems coaching, and it's basically there's basically two camps of professional coaching.
Mm-hmm.
One is one-on-one coaching, where you only work one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's systems coaching or group-based coaching, and a system is any group of two or more.
Mm-hmm.
So ORSC gives you some tools and techniques to coach a few people or a Scrum team
Mm-hmm.
or a leadership group, a group of leaders or whatnot. And I found that, so a system is it's not only the individuals, but it's the relationships between them. Right. So let's go back to the Chicago Bulls.
Mm-hmm.
There's you would be coaching the individual coaching would be coaching the individuals, but now we're coaching the guards,
Mm.
the forwards and the centers,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also coaching the system is the Bulls,
Right. Right.
right?
Interesting.
And literally the Bulls is an independent thing. So the way Orsk would look at it, you're coaching the guards, but you need to also coach the Bulls.
Right.
And the Bulls may have a different view than the individuals.
Right.
So of like the strategy and the strengths of the team, etc.
Good.
So
Good.
that's a real quick way of saying, if you've ever heard the term systems coaching,
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of what it's getting at. It's not looking myopically, but also raising the level and looking at it from a systems point of view.
Perfect. Okay. Last question, I think, for anyone who is new to Agile or looking to get into this space, and hopefully, transition to an organization or potentially interviewing for their first role, what advice would you give them?
I think it's my daughter pivoted from social work to, she is now a scrum master,
Okay.
and she got a scrum master role without any experience.
Okay.
Now that's rare. So
Mm-hmm.
you need a special company to see your strengths outside of of, of software. And
Right.
she found a special company, but she navigated from one. I mean, when I say a pivot, it was a very large pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And I've known people who pivoted from teaching high school to Scrum Mastery.
Right.
And I
Same.
what I observe that they do is I say join the community. Uh, I think we have a hell of a community. Like what you're doing is community driven. There are groups in the Dallas Fort Worth area. There are Agile groups. There's subgroups, coaching groups, Scrum Master groups,
Mm-hmm.
special interest groups. There's conferences. There's coaching circles that are virtual now that you can join and be and learn how to coach. So Rhiannon, my daughter, I kept sending her links to different groups, different opportunities. I identified some core training.
Mm-hmm.
In her case, I thought it was useful for her to go get a certification
Mm-hmm.
because she had no basis at all. And I'm like, I really think you need to have a baseline of something.
Fundamental.
Uh, but I think what my recommendation is, uh, dive into our community. The other thing is ask for help. Don't be shy about asking for help. I find like when people reach out to me, I rarely say no unless I'm really busy. I try to help, but the phenomenon is people are too shy or reluctant to reach out and say, I'd like to get help from someone. I
Mm.
would encourage people to dive into the community and do not be reticent about asking for help because my experience is this is a very friendly community. The Agile
Agreed.
community is a friendly in general community. And for me right now, what gets my attention is anyone uh, women in Agile. So I mean, I am inclusive of everyone, but people of color, if anyone is it's diversity related, I'm going to jump through 5 hoops to try to help. And I don't think I'm alone. The Agile Alliance is trying to do things like
Yeah.
that,
Yep.
right? So dive into the community, but be curious. The other thing is you're not going to be no one's going to spoon feed you. So you be curious, ask for help, but be willing to do the work.
Yeah. And I
And
would
I
say,
think go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I would say, do the work first. Do some of the work first, right? Come with
Yeah.
something in hand, and say, hey, this is how far I've been able to get. What more can you help me out
So
with?
a so amen, Victor. So here's a place where I don't help someone. Probably once a day I get an email from somewhere around the world and say, Bob Galen explained to me Scrum, or Bob Galen explained to me Agile.
Those go to the
And
spam folder.
exactly. And what that is there was no work done whatsoever,
Right.
right? So I think you hit the other side of it. Yes, we want to help you, but you have to show that you have the passion and the curiosity and the hard work. But I'll tell you, if you show that, I'll work with you and other people will work with you. So that's my advice.
Wonderful advice. Well, Bob, thank you very much. You are on LinkedIn as Bob Galen.
Bob Galen
Um,
on LinkedIn,
are
Bob
you
Galen on Twitter.
okay? You on Instagram
Uh,
too?
no, I'm
Snapchat?
too old fashioned. No. So I am not on Facebook. I'm too. Look at me, Victor. Look at this face. I'm not
That's
on Snapchat,
experience.
and I'm not on Facebook. But I'm on those 2 places. I
LinkedIn
have
and
some
Twitter.
websites and a podcast. Uh, but Victor, enough of it. I really want to thank you.
Oh,
I
no
did
problem.
not know who you were. I said yes. This was a joy. You're a
Thank you.
wonderful young man. So thank
Thank
you
you so much.
for engaging with me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that as well, Bob. Hopefully we'll be able to get you back on the show sometime. But yeah, thank you. You didn't know me. I didn't know you. You just reached out and you said yes. You didn't ask any questions. You just booked. So I really
I just
appreciate that.
I just booked.
You
It's the
didn't know
new
what you're
Bob.
walking into.
Well, it was pretty frightening at the beginning. You scared me. No, it's all good. So someone said it's meta hyphen cast. Someone said the podcast, and
Yes.
it's in the chat. You can look in the chat. It's meta META hyphen CAST. And we've done, if there's an agile topic that we haven't covered, please email me. Josh and I have talked about at least once almost everything. So look back in there.
Let me ask you a question that came up in our community. I don't know if it was last week or a few weeks ago, right? Theoretical situation.
Okay.
So you're a scrum master. The team pulls in 5 stories. Each story is 5 points each for the sprint, right? 25 points total. Okay.
Yep.
The team does 20 points worth of work, and towards the end of
Yep.
the sprint, something happens, some type of fire that the product owner comes in and says, "Hey, we really need you guys to take this other story and discard the work that you've done on this last story." Okay. For whatever reason, you agree, right? You see the value in it and how important it is, and the team does as well, and so you guys pull it in, and you maybe only complete maybe this is a 3 point story, and you guys are able to complete the 3 point story. However, the fifth story that you guys started, maybe you got halfway through it and you were unable to complete it. What do you do with that story? Do you give the team partial credit, maybe 2.5, 3 points for the work that they've done? Do they get no points and potentially carry it over to the next sprint, or some other option?
So the historical original agile coaching answer
Mm-hmm.
by guys like me, Ron Jeffries, any of the original sort of old timer coaches would say, and I'm not saying this differentially.
Sure.
The point was you only get credit for done work. Period.
Done, done, done.
End of story.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what that says is you would carry. You don't even worry about the points. The story's not done. It's a 5 point story. You don't take credit for the five. You don't arithmetically divide it up.
Right. You don't
It
split
goes
the
and it
story and create a new story.
no, you finish it in the next sprint. It's one of the reasons, Victor, why if you look at velocity, you don't react to velocity. Velocity is a rolling average over the 3 sprints, the
Yep.
last 3 sprints
Mm-hmm.
is a recommendation that I often hear and
Mm-hmm.
support. So the point is there's going to be turbulence
Right. It's gonna go up.
from,
It's gonna go down.
from sprint to sprint, and so that rolling average is going to smooth that out so that you're more accurate. So that whatever that 5 points that carried over, so that means that this sprint, let's just argue that it's a 1 point. So we deliver 20, our velocity is historically 25.
Mm-hmm.
This time we deliver 20 plus 1 point,
Mm-hmm.
the interrupt story. Then the next one we deliver 25 plus 5, so 30. So now we have this, 25, 21, 30.
Mm-hmm.
30 does not mean that our velocity just went up,
Right. We're not delivering
right?
30 every sprint.
Exactly, because it's a rolling average.
Right.
But that's where, so a lot of coaches, I think, will take that tack. But I don't think it's the only answer. I think if you're in an organization where you're trying to provide cover for your team,
Mm-hmm.
or people are over analyzing the velocity, then I think splitting it, do what you have to do to survive.
Sure.
But I like this notion that there's no partial credit in Agile. I think it drives the right in Scrum.
Right.
We only get credit for 100% done work.
Then it's done. Yeah.
Yeah, and have deep, rich. I mean, I'm really sort of a dictator when it comes to this. Like, if we say that a done story has no bugs, and
Mm-hmm.
we fix 9 bugs, and we have one bug, like one bug, one
Right.
little bug.
Right.
If that's our agreement, then I want us to look each other in the eye and say it's either done or
Or
it's
it's
not
not.
done.
Yeah.
But what did you have a situation like that? What did you do?
So I
Music.
mean, so I pretty much gave the same response that you gave, right? It's either done or it's not. There is no partially done work. That is the textbook rule, but sometimes developers don't have psychological safety, and I've worked in those organizations where there is someone that is micromanaging your burn down chart, micromanaging your velocity, really nitpicking some of those things. And so you gotta sometimes advocate for your team and help the team out when you can. And so if you've got to, we'll split it, although it's not best practices, but we know that there's a reason that we're doing it in this instance for the team. And so we'll try to use that as a coaching opportunity,
Yep.
both for the team, for the product owner, and for whoever is nitpicking, because, right, there has to be some sort of trade-off that the organization or the product owner has to feel some sort of pain for interrupting us mid-sprint, right? And so if we don't
I,
train them that this is the trade-off, we're just going to be caught in this vicious cycle.
I actually think, and I don't know how you phrased it, I don't remember, but I actually think the product owner has to ask the team for permission. And part of
Sure.
that, so it's not just,
Yeah.
the stuff hit the fan.
Right.
I have to do this. I've always coached that the team has to see its way
Yep.
to actually reconcile it in. There
Yep.
could be a condition example where putting that story in stasis takes more time
Yep.
than
Absolutely. Happens all the
implementing.
time.
Right. Yeah. So it's not just yes, we ask the team,
Yes.
and you said it.
We agree.
The team saw it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that says also that we could disagree and say we will get to it in the next sprint.
Absolutely.
I love that there's some discipline in those discussions with the team.
Yeah. I think
Cool.
there should be. Too many times the teams feel like, and again, right, the power dynamic between the three of us, right? Too many times I've been on teams where they feel like the product owner is like a proxy manager or their manager, and they'll get in trouble if they don't do what the product owner says. And so try to always coach the team like, look, we're a team. Like, we're here together. This is our decision to make. I'm going to provide some initial buffer once I even understand this is coming into the product owner, but you guys need to back me up as well. You guys can't waffle when I bring the product owner in here because I've kind of already set it up for you guys. And so sometimes it's a work in progress, but we usually get it done in a
One of the
healthy way.
things you inspired me just in a little bit, I wrote a blog post a few years ago. I just dusted it off this morning for this group I'm coaching.
Hmm.
And it talks about 12 ways that a product owner can re-energize their team. And there's a counterpoint. There's ways that a product owner can rip the soul out of their team,
Yes.
right? And so don't rip the soul out of your team. Like
Right.
re-energize them. I'll send you a link to that. Maybe you want to share it with folks.
Absolutely. I'll
It's
share it with the
it's
community.
sort of a fun take, and this is one of them. Is how do you dance with the team for demands and things like that.
Right. Right. Well, Bob, I appreciate it. You have a wonderful evening there in North Carolina, and I look forward to
You
talking to you soon.
you do the same, and there was multiple participants. So for everyone who was chatting and stuff, it was nice. I didn't see you, but it was nice meeting you. So thank you, Victor, for inviting me. It was absolutely a pleasure, and I'd love to come back sometime. So take good
Absolutely.
care
Thanks,
and
Bob.
stay in touch.
Will
Bye,
do.
everyone.